The colour chart you see here hangs in many primary schools in New Zealand. The question is, how did the Māori language get to the point where it was decided that these specific words are what we teach our children about these colours? If you ask, he aha te tai o tēnei, what colour is this? Our research shows that you will have got different answers at different periods in history. A child today would say, karaka. 70 years ago, they might have said arani, a loan word from English, orange, arani. 170 years ago, they would almost certainly have said furrow. Today, furrow means red. 170 years ago, furrow encompassed the English concepts of red, orange and brown, and some pinks, and some purples. And if you'd asked someone 800 years ago, they would likely have answered kura or colour. What drove these changes in the language? The development of te reo Māori can be roughly divided into 4 periods. The initial Polynesian settlement of New Zealand in the 12th century, where language change was driven by responses to the new environment. Then the arrival of Europeans in the 19th century, where language change became driven by cultural contact. Then the start of te reo's revitalisation project in the mid-20th century, with its ongoing evolution in the 21st century. We'll discuss changes in te reo Māori's colour terminology in the same chronological order. But first, a little background on colour theory. Berlin and Kay's theory starts from the assumption that every language has basic colour terms that are not reducible to other colour terms. So there may be many words within a single colour category, but there is one or maybe 2 overarching words that describe that category. For example, all of these words for blue are encompassed by the one category, blue. That's the word you teach your children when teaching them about colour. English has 11 basic colour categories: white, black, red, green, yellow, blue, brown, purple, pink, orange and grey. Berlin and Kay developed a method for categorising colour, where you first elicit the basic colour terms in the language, and then you ask monolingual speakers to categorise all colours into the basic categories. This chart shows the range of possible colours from left to right, red through yellow, green, blue, purple, back to red, and from pale at the top to dark at the bottom. You ask questions like this: if you had to give the colour a name, what basic colour name would you use? And this is the answer you get in English. If you're brought up speaking English as a first language, you automatically assimilate this as part of your cultural understanding. You grow up learning these basic colour names and the boundaries between the colour categories. But other languages do not use the English categorisation. Burinmo, for example, has 5 colour categories. All of the English blacks, browns, dark greens, dark blues and some purples are in the category described by the single word kel. Almost all the other blues and greens are in a single category described by no. Berlin and Kay's theory is that languages develop new categories in a particular order, likely in response to environmental stimuli. If a language has only 2 colour categories, they are light and dark. If a language has 3, then the third category is always red, the colour of fire and blood. Then comes yellow or green, then the other of yellow or green, then blue, then brown. This theory from 1969 has been critiqued and adjusted over the years, but a large proportion of the world's languages do conform to this sequence. For example, there is one language in Papua New Guinea that is in stage 1 with just 2 colour categories, and this slide shows examples of other current languages that have different numbers of colour categories. With that colour theory under our belts, and before diving into the core discussion, let's have a brief history of te reo Māori and its ancestral language. There is consensus in the literature that all Austronesian languages spoken in the Eastern Polynesian region, including Māori, Hawaiian and Tahitian, all derive from a shared common ancestral language called Proto-Eastern Polynesian. This was spoken in the Society Islands around 800 years ago. The latest archaeological evidence suggests that the Austronesian expansion from the Society Islands was a rapid dispersal, resulting in the settlement of the most remote islands of Polynesia, including Tahiti, Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand. Through this settlement of new island groups, Proto-Eastern Polynesian diversified into a dozen modern languages, including Te Reo Māori. This rapid dispersal and subsequent isolation of the different populations makes this language family an excellent case study of how languages develop over time. In our investigation, we used two online databases, the Austronesian Comparative Dictionary and the Polynesian Lexicon Project Online, to trace colour terminology reconstructible to Proto-Eastern Polynesian, which is the immediate ancestor of Te Reo Māori. We then examined 11 dictionaries published during different stages of the language's development, from the earliest by Williams in 1844 to the most recent, the Te Aka Online Dictionary. We know that the earliest dictionaries were compiled before substantial influence of the English language on the Maori language, and that fact is vital to the robustness of our results. To trace the rise and fall of different terms, we compiled all documented colour terms into a comprehensive spreadsheet. This includes the documentation of specific lexical items that were later reanalysed as colour terms, such as modern kiwi for grey, which initially refers to the kiwi bird, and modern tawa for purple, which initially refers to a berry. We then identified patterns of retention versus innovation over time and analysed both the lexical changes within the individual colour categories and the overall changes to the Maori colour categories over time. So let us start with what we have reconstructed for Proto-Eastern Polynesian, the immediate ancestor of the Maori language. We mapped Proto-Eastern Polynesian words to their English equivalents. We found that there is not a direct correspondence. For example, kusi can mean the English black or green or blue. Sega can mean English red or orange or yellow. And both melo and kefu can refer to English red or brown. These three examples clearly show that Proto-Eastern Polynesian had different colour categories to English. The evidence is such that we believe that Proto-Eastern Polynesian had 5 colour categories. At this distance in time, we cannot know which particular word might have been the basic colour term attached to each colour category, but we are fairly sure that there were 5 categories. Let's move on then to the 19th century, where we now have evidence from the early dictionaries of Māori compiled by English missionaries, but before there was significant contact between the general Maori population and the small number of Europeans who were visiting New Zealand. First, we look at language loss. A large number of Proto-Eastern Polynesian words are not attested in the 19th century dictionaries, indicating substantial modification of the language in response to the new environment of New Zealand. Looking at the first dictionaries, Williams' first dictionary was prepared before significant influence of English on Maori, while Tregar's dictionary was compiled later but explicitly aimed to avoid loanwords. There are a lot of linguistic innovations that have appeared over 700 years. All these words in yellow are new. There are 2 words, kahurangi for blue and hina for grey, that refer to particular coloured things, the blue sky and grey hair, but they do not appear to refer to the colour more generally. And there is one loan word that snuck into the dictionary, papura for purple. The evidence is that Maori at this stage still had 5 colour categories. The only significant blue thing in the environment is the sky, and when there's only one thing of a particular colour, you don't need a word to describe that colour. Again, we cannot be certain which is the basic colour term for each colour, but the dictionaries provide evidence that the basic colour term is most likely to be one of the 2 shown in this list for each colour category. There are 2 particular colour terms I want to draw to your attention. Kakariki for green and kowhai for yellow. These are completely new words. They have no precursors in Proto-Eastern Polynesian, and today they are the modern names for these two English colours. Kakariki is clearly not originally a colour word. It is derived from two words, kaka, parrot, and riki, little, so literally little parrot. But other things are also called kakariki, including this lizard and a type of green melon. So we hypothesize that over 700 years, the bird was first named kakariki. Then, as children are taught their colours over generations, the name of this bright green parrot becomes attached to the generic concept of green. And then other green things, the lizard and the melon, are named after the colour, not the bird. The second example is kowhai. We hypothesize that over centuries, the name of this flower, kowhai, the most brilliantly yellow thing in the New Zealand environment, became attached to the colour yellow. In the same way that, in English, the name of the orange fruit became attached to the colour orange over the course of the 16th century. We now reach the nadir of the history of the Māori language. There was considerable suppression of the language in the early 20th century. Children were punished for using it at school. The language was in danger of dying out as the number of native speakers dropped dramatically. Nevertheless, there was still considerable scholarly work and efforts to maintain and preserve the language. The last major revision to William's Māori dictionary was published in 1957. It lists a substantial number of words for colour. There are a very large number of words that have a meaning related to red, but only a couple for blue, purple, pink, or orange. The first thing to note is that William's 1957 dictionary maintains the understanding that the word furrow can mean red, or brown, or orange. That is the traditional meaning of furrow, while today most modern children think furrow refers only to red. Then we find that in 1957 there was no agreed word for orange. The modern orange is karaka. In 1957, William lists parakaraka, which can mean yellow or orange, furrow, which can mean red, brown, or orange, or arani, which is a loan word from English. Indeed, there are lots of loan words for concepts that did not exist in earlier Māori. Brown as a colour in its own right, grey, purple, and orange. Finally, pink is also a concept that did not exist in earlier Māori, but uniquely, pink does not have a loan word. In Māori, it is karatea, literally red-white, or mawhero, literally white-red. Both indicate that Māori see pink as a pale shade of red, not as a colour category of its own. And indeed, pink is just a pale shade of red, but it can be challenging to try to convince a native English-speaking child of this. Try it. An English-speaking child is likely to say that pink is pink and red is red with a clear boundary between them, because that is how English culturally delineates its colour categories. By the 1990s, we had reached a point where there is becoming a consensus on what you should call these English colour categories in Te Reo Māori. Ryan's 1995 dictionary has a table at the front of colour words. Winifred Bauer's 1997 work has her list of the words that Māori are using at that time for the English colours. There is complete agreement on white, black, red and yellow, and there is clear use of loan words for brown, grey, orange and purple. Pink still sticks out as being an English colour category for which there is no Māori word, still sitting there as white-red, mawhero. Today, the situation for Māori is better. There has been significant revitalisation of the language. There are Māori language preschools, kohanga reo, and Māori is taught in all New Zealand primary schools. Today you can buy a range of educational materials that you can put up on the walls of your kohanga reo or primary school. However, these resources are all pretty much using the English colour categories, and indeed you can find variations of many of these charts in languages all around the world. In many cases, manufacturers are using standard templates and then simply looking up Māori words to put onto these templates. And what we find is that the different manufacturers looked up the words in different places. There is agreement on most of the words, but for example, is brown paraoni or parauri? One is a loan word from English, the other is a compound word meaning literally dark yellow. For purple, is it poroporo or waiporoporo? And why does none of the colour charts use the word tawa, which is what the New Zealand's Ministry of Education says should be the word for the English purple? For blue, the charts cannot agree on whether it is kahorangi or kikorangi or both. Rangi is the sky god. The words mean the cloak of Rangi or the flesh of Rangi. Both appear to be equally valid, and one of the charts tries to teach us that kikorangi is pale blue, while kahurangi is dark blue, though we can find no historic evidence for that distinction. So this is where we are today. We have agreement that there are Māori words that represent each of the English colour categories. For 7 categories, all the educational resources agree. Today, furrow means red, and it means only red, not the red or brown or orange of previous centuries. For black and blue, we appear to have a consensus that for those 2 colours, there are 2 equally valid words each. And it is only for brown and purple that we do not have agreement. Of these, we still have 1 loan word, paraoni for brown, and we have 2 compounds, parauri for brown, dark yellow, and mawhuru for pink, white red. Otherwise, traditional Māori words have been adopted to mean the English colour. Kiwi, a grey bird, for grey. Karaka, an orange berry, for orange. Poroporo, a purple flower, for purple. The challenge is that the 11 English colour categories have taken over from the original 5 Māori colour categories. Is this a problem? In one sense, no. Languages always evolve. In another sense, yes. If we want to understand the context of historic writings and sayings, we need to know that historic Māori used language differently. Today, furrow means red. In the 19th century, it meant red and brown and orange. Our research shows that 12th century Proto-Eastern Polynesian had 5 colour categories, and that although there was substantial language development over 700 years, the Māori language had no need to expand on those 5 categories. It shows that when Europeans arrived with the foreign 11 colour categories, Māori adopted loanwords to describe the foreign concepts. As the language was revitalised, Māori repurposed existing words, kiwi, karaka, poroporo, to replace the loanwords. Today we teach children their colours in Māori, using the Māori words that fit the 11 English colour categories. If we continue to do this, then over the next generation or 2, these words and this colour categorisation will become fixed in Te Reo Māori. Thank you for listening. This work was done at Victoria University of Wellington by me, Neil Dodgson, in the School of Engineering and Computer Science, and by Victoria Chen in the School of Linguistics and Applied Language Studies. I bring the colour theory, while Victoria brings the linguistic expertise. We could not have done this without Maimuna Zahido, who compiled the enormous list of colour terms from 13 sources. In developing this project, we have talked to a range of people about their experience of Te Reo Māori today, and we thank them all. If you have your own thoughts on how you learnt your colours, how you use colour terminology, or how your language has changed its colour words over the past 200 years, leave your thoughts in the comments. This video is only an introduction to our work. We have a longer presentation that covers more of the linguistic investigation and more of the colour theory, for which there is a link in the description. Again, thank you for listening. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa.